Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first ever electronic meeting of the District of Squamish Council for Tuesday, April 7th. Hatsqualin, Queestilukmuk, Latskohomish, Owayamio. We are meeting on the traditional territory of the Squamish Nation. Before we adopt the agenda, I will just ask all of our staff and council who are part of this new experience to be patient as we work out any technical bugs, and also to members of the public. We may have trouble at times, perhaps, sharing the screen with you, but you should be able to see the slides and see me. At this time, you won't be able to see members of council, although I can. They're all present and accounted for. So with that, I will ask for a motion to adopt the agenda. Moved by Councillor Herford, seconded by Councillor French. That's cool. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Robin, when it was electronic before, we had a statement that I had to read, so do you still want me to read that? Okay. While I can see council members, if you do decide to leave the meeting, can you just wave your hand at me so that I see that you're leaving, so that we record the time that you exit and enter, and I'll let the minute taker know because I can see them and you can't. Council members, if you wish to be placed on the speakers list, you can either raise your hand or indicate that you want to ask a question through the chat function. I will leave that on. Members cannot use the chat function to communicate with each other during the meeting, and I will be monitoring that. With respect to the vote, council members are only required to state a nay vote. So I will assume you are in agreement unless when I say any opposed, I see hands or hear you speak. You shall keep your computer or phone on mute unless you wish to speak. Please participate in the meeting. We all know that you're there. If you're having troubles, please text the corporate officer and she will let me know. So if we're having technical difficulties, we will take a recess just to make sure that everyone can stay connected. If the technical difficulty occurs on our side, we will also take a 10-minute recess just to get everything sorted out. Is that clear to everyone? As staff are presenting, they should appear on your screens, council. And we have our corporate officer here who is making sure the slides progress for the audience streaming from home. All right. Any notice of motion? Seeing none. We do have one proclamation request. The person did request to be here. We asked them to not come and told them that we would entertain this proclamation that May 2020 be proclaimed Cystic Fibrosis Month in the District of Squamish. Is there a mover? That is moved by Councillor Race and seconded by Councillor Anderson. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Just for the public's benefit, we usually have consideration of unscheduled public attendance, but we've asked people not to come to City Hall. And we're still awaiting some guidance from the province about how we will do public participation going forward during the state of emergency. We haven't received that guidance yet, so really we're just moving forward business that doesn't require public participation. Although, as everyone knows, you can always send us emails on any topic that you like at any time. Our first item of business is under Section 8 bylaws. This is the adoption of our amended procedure bylaw. Does someone want to move that? That is moved by Councillor Stoner, seconded by Councillor French. And remember, Council, you don't have to raise your hand for a yes vote, just any opposed. Is that a question, Councillor Pettengill?
Yes, or just a comment, I guess.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
And I just, I think this is reasonable. It's trying to find that balance between making sure people just can't be bothered to show up, but also giving us the ability when we're in extraordinary circumstances to participate. but looking at what is transpiring now and envisioning, unfortunately, we may see a bit of, return to something we're more used to in the summer, and then things may fire up. There's sometimes a lag with the province. So I do have a bit of apprehension about if the province has a lag in declaring a state of emergency, will we have the quorum and the ability to adjust down the road in time? And so I do wonder, partly in relation to that, if in a future iteration we may want to consider being a little bit more explicit about how we count absences. I know Councillor Race and I both missed, I think, 2 meetings at least outside of the state of emergency, but because of everything that was going around. And so I can see this presenting some logistical challenges.
Hey, Conrad, it's Chris Wickham calling. I'm trying to be...
Chris, you need to mute your computer because we can hear you.
Chris Wickham. Ian,
And Ian, you need to mute yourself as well.
turn your video and your...
Thank you. Are you finished, Councillor Pettengill?
Yes.
Councillor Race.
Thank you. I just, to Councillor Pettengill's comment about the 2 meetings that we attended electronically, personally, I'm not sure that constitutes an absence from a meeting in the sense that, for example, the meetings prior to that where I was actually out of the country, I was not attending the meeting. But I think an attendance electronically or in person would be the same for, you're worried about missing so many meetings before you can lose your job. I don't know that that would count.
Does the corporate officer want to say something?
So an absence from a meeting is regular council meetings and does not include electronic participation at all. That is attendance in a meeting. The procedure bylaw does say that there's only 4 electronic participations in a year, unless with leave of council, which I'm assuming would happen for the COVID.
Right. Does that clarify for you, Councillor Pettengill?
Yeah, my concern was just, and it was, I may have misspoken, but I was referring to electronic participation and how we count that, and just logistically having a little bit of apprehension that, in the winter, there's some chance we may find ourselves where we're suddenly not able, the guidance, the public health guidance is not to come together, but the province hasn't yet declared their state of emergency, and then so we find ourselves for, a few weeks in the situation of now certain people can't show up because they've hit their count of 4, like Councillor Race and I, this is our 4th meeting electronically participating this year. And so just making sure, and maybe for now the best solution is to have a motion resetting the clock at this point, or just being mindful of watching the public health thing as we move forward so we don't find ourselves in a bind in the fall.
Yeah, you're all right, because under the state of emergency, we can have as many electronic meetings as we need to. So we don't need to reset the clock. We're all on side for this. And
so would Councillor Race not be at the count of 2 or 4 then? Because I think 2 happened during the state of emergency and 2 just before.
We're not going to count them.
Okay.
And if we feel like we're running up against that, again, in an emergency, with the leave of council, we can have members participate electronically for more than 4 meetings. It's just a stopgap measure to make sure that people are not abusing that right, as people do expect us to show up in council chambers. So.
Okay.
All right. So with that, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Okay, council, only vote if you're opposed. I'm still seeing hands on the yes, but it's a bit of a lag, so it confuses me. So only vote on the nay side. I'm going to assume you're for it if I don't see your hands, so that'd be good. It was unanimous. Okay, we're now on to item 9A1. This is the amendment to the electronic participation at council meetings policy. And are there any questions, council, on this? Yes, Councillor Anderson.
In the report to council, it is
stated that district staff have added an action related to urban form in response to council feedback. And this is regarding a scoring system for rezoning applications. I wonder if you may be able to advise me on where that has been inserted in the climate action plan, which section or move, if you like.
We're not on the climate
be
action
able to-
plan yet.
Oh, excuse me.
We're on 9A1, which is the amendment to the electronic participation at council meetings policy.
Excuse me.
Yep, that's all right. Okay, I don't see any questions, so is there a motion to approve the amended policy? Moved by Councillor Herford, seconded by Councillor Stoner. All those in favor? Any opposed?
Told me not to.
No opposed, motion carries unanimously. Okay, now we're on to item 9B. First up is the Community Climate Action Plan, and we have Ian Pickett's joining us for this presentation.
Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Great.
Just,
Yeah.
on a point of order, Mayor,
Yes.
Councillor Stoner disappeared from my screen. There's something,
She's still there.
some reason not on my screen.
And we're just sharing this.
The rest of you are there, but not her.
Councillor
If I
Race,
talk, does it make me come back?
Not yet.
Councillor Race, if you have it in gallery view, that might make a difference.
I'm not even sure I want to go there.
Okay. But you'll have to trust me that Councillor Stoner is still present.
Okay, no, that's fine. It's just, for some reason, she's dropped off. Everybody else is still there. Mr. Pickett's still there, but I can see the presentation, but somehow she's not there.
Okay. All
It
right.
might be just me, sure.
So we'll turn it over to Mr. Pickett's.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And my appreciation to everyone who's put so much work into making this all happen in such unusual circumstances. So as you know, my name is Ian Pickett's and I'm the Manager of Sustainability and Climate Change here at the District of Squamish. I'm here with our Director of Engineering, Chris Wickham. Our Sustainability Coordinator, Dora Gunn, also led this initiative for many months, and several other staff members have been vocally involved. We'll go to the next slide now. Next slide.
Yes, just relax. It won't go, it's
Oh, sure.
frozen.
Oh, we're just frozen. Hold on a second.
No worries. I'll start talking and then it'll come up.
There we
There
go.
we go.
Great. So on slide 2, we just have a quick overview of the presentation. As almost everyone listening has heard presentations on the Community Climate Action Plan a number of times, we're going to go over the front matter relatively quickly, and we'll focus on discussing your feedback and the changes that we made in response. Next slide. Although this is clearly not currently front of mind, there is a lot of momentum around addressing climate change in Squamish and in Canada and around the world. This slide shows an image of hundreds of people gathered in a rally here in Squamish in September of 2019. Many of you may have also been in Vancouver on this same day where over 100,000 people peacefully assembled. The District of Squamish has declared a climate emergency. In doing so, we committed to the targets laid out by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. This means that we need to achieve 45% reductions by 2030 compared to a 2010 baseline. This also means that we need to be net zero emissions by 2050. The really nice thing about net zero is you don't have to worry about your baseline too much. To find a way to reach these targets, the district embarked on a community energy and emissions plan, which has since been renamed the Community Climate Action Plan, which I will refer to sometimes as the CCAP. Next slide, please. A big part of the CCAP was getting detailed greenhouse gas emissions modeling completed. The district hired consultants who determined that Squamish's emissions in 2010 were approximately 89,000 tons of CO2 equivalent. Our emissions increased to approximately 97,000 tons of CO2 equivalent in 2017. And our business as usual emissions trajectory is shown in this graph, and it shows that we will be at approximately 94,000 tons for 2030. So business as usual essentially assumes that the district does not take further action to address emissions beyond what is already in place. So for example, this estimate would include population growth, but would not include the landfill gas flare project because it is not completed. There are actions by other orders of government that are reflected in this trajectory. So for example, the decrease in vehicular emissions are from new vehicle standards and the province's zero emissions vehicle mandate. There are also changes to BC's building code, which result in reductions. So you'll note how the light and dark blue segments both stay consistent, although there would be significant increase in the number of buildings. Next slide, please. In an attempt to meet the 45% reductions targets, we drafted the Community Climate Action Plan. We used the modeled emissions and a pragmatic overview of what local government can do and what local governments can implement given their powers. The report is organized into 6 big moves. These are broad categories of actions. So each big move has a vision and it has considerations written about it. It's also important to note that the modeling is done by big moves. So the numbers are compared to business as usual, not the 2010 baseline in the report. Within each big move, we made strategies for broader categories of actions, which are different ways to tackle the big move. Each strategy is assessed according to cost, leverage, and impact. This assessment helps us to determine which actions to take and in what order. Finally, we have discrete actions within each of the strategies. They are categorized as direct, incentivize, educate, and/or partner. These categories largely reflect how much jurisdiction a local government has in enacting change related to the topic. They are also assigned a difficulty rating like a trails system. Next slide. On slide 6, we see the modeled results of where the plan will get us for 2030 and beyond. This is assuming that the actions are implemented to their full extent. You can see how emissions are reduced to varying degrees in different sectors. In some, there are drastic reductions, in others, there are minimal reductions. This largely relates to local government's ability to influence different decisions. Remember that our goal for this iteration of the CCAP is to hit our 2030 target and be ready to hit 2040. This approach just makes more sense as there's so much uncertainty regarding how economic, technological, cultural, and political landscapes will change over the course of 20 years. So as we get closer to 2030, we definitely need to shift our targets longer term toward 2040 and beyond. Next slide. As you no doubt noticed in the last graph, the actions in our plan do not currently get us quite to our target. We have 6,200 tons of additional estimated emissions reductions. We all struggled with this when creating the plan, but we ultimately agreed that this was a solid approach. With this shortfall, we are recognizing that we have to be continually actively learning, looking for other opportunities, considering new measures, and adapting new technologies to get there. This is also an implicit acknowledgement that this is going to be a difficult challenge. Next slide, please. Over these next few slides, we are just going to highlight some of the things that we were able to change and that we were not able to change in the report based on your feedback in the March 10th Committee of the Whole Council meeting. Next slide. Right away, you'll see that the biggest change is in the executive summary. There is much more emphasis on the vision, and we have done considerable design work to make it more accessible. A huge thanks to communications, particularly Sandra, for finding the time to do this amidst a very busy schedule. Next slide, please. Here on slide 10, we have another example of visual and organizational improvement in the executive summary. Communications is obviously very, very busy right now, so we could not revisit the whole plan. Some people in recreation have been redeployed to help us with this, so we look forward to going over the entire plan briefly, but with an eye to make the graphics especially more attractive. In particular, we are interested in making the action tables, which are quite large and quite comprehensive, more attractive and easily to engage with. Next slide. We also changed the visions in response to your feedback. So here are 3 examples of the 6 Big Move visions. We have tried to make them much more active and much more bold, often thinking beyond the constraints of our 2030 targets. Next slide. We have updated the out-of-scope emissions in the report. You will note that the wood fiber LNG number is larger to account for electricity use during operations. We did not add the potential compressor station, but noted that it should be a consideration. Recall that there is significant uncertainty in many of these emission estimates. Also, the indirect or Scope 3 emissions are those that are produced elsewhere. We have provided a better explanation of this in the report for readers to more quickly understand where these emissions are coming from. Next slide. In response to feedback by Councillors Herford, Pettingill, and others, we updated the report to emphasize that it is crucial to address all sources of emissions, not just community emissions, if we are going to hit these targets. So we have noted this now in the executive summary, the introduction, the scope section, and also reiterated it in the conclusion. So this is just a snippet of text from the report, reminding readers that although we are focused on community emissions right now for the report, that we need to be cognizant of all types. We have also included discussion regarding the idea that we could revisit the scope in the future to address indirect or other sources of emissions. This will involve some really careful thinking and strategy, and it'll also really push a local government to reflect on where our levers are. We have to be really careful if we do this not to double count emissions, and especially not to double count emissions reduction. Next slide. Another piece of feedback we responded to was making the difficulty levels much more explicit. So we added the trail marker symbols to the report in the executive summary and updated all of the tables so that they have a discrete description of what green, blue, and black mean. We also went through and revisited several of the difficulty levels. In particular, a lot of the urban form actions were assigned a higher difficulty, reflecting how much challenges we anticipate experiencing. Next slide. We spent by far the most time revisiting Big Move 2 since the March 10th meeting. We spoke with BC Transit, with the modelers, and also briefly with people from Whistler. We have adjusted the projected outcome to a doubling of transit and active transportation trips. So we feel very good that this is a much better framed projected outcome, although we do acknowledge that it is not numerically different. Unfortunately, Big Move 2 is very stubborn. In further discussion, we recognize that a 15% reduction in vehicle trips, or a doubling of active transport and transit, is quite ambitious compared to what other communities are proposing. One good example for comparison was Vernon. So Vernon has been highlighted as a community that has a large commuter population, but has invested significantly in transit and is aggressively prioritizing density in their OCP. Vernon has set a target of 0.5% reduction in trips per year, which is, our goal is 60% more ambitious than this one, and we are more of a commuter town, so we have a larger number of longer trips. Vancouver is an example of a place where we have that has achieved much more significant gains. However, they are much different, particularly in terms of population density. So in short, the modeling constrained us from going above and beyond a more ambitious estimate. That being said, we are still putting a lot of effort in this in order to reduce emissions, and also recognizing that there are so many benefits associated with this big move, and there are very important equity considerations. So we have made a defensible estimate based on the data and comparable communities. We are still trying to enable community members to make changes. We sincerely hope that the modeling is wrong. We also hope to blow the modeling out of the water. However, at this point, we could not change the modeling itself. Next slide. We met with planning to go over the actions related to urban form. you will notice that the top two actions have been adjusted to be short, and the second one is now black to reflect its higher difficulty. The third action is a newer one that we added in response to your feedback. Planning very much wants to be the group that develops this third action, and we wholeheartedly agree. As we did not have time to meaningfully consult and come up with this, we had to temporarily assign it as a long priority, but it's definitely, we're glad that it's in the plan, and we look forward to moving along with it. So this is in the Big Move 2 section. Councillor Anderson had a previous question about that, and I'll pull up the page number in just a second. Next slide, please. So here are a couple other changes. We reassigned the top action to blue, as this is something that will need a lot of convincing. This is something that we will really need to tie into our bigger community vision and our communication strategy related to this plan. We really want people to understand that how a denser, more walkable community fits into this vision. We have updated Action 2 to look into further increased frequency. There were a number of comments asking about going beyond 15-minute frequency and a desire to do so. Dora was able to follow up with BC Transit about this, and they had significant cautions about the expense of higher frequency than 15 minutes in a smaller community. They estimated that moving from a 15-minute to a 10-minute frequency costs almost double, is a doubling in cost, and is expected to have diminishing returns. So we may get there. We are still taking action, and we are hopeful that this is another example of where we are able to break out of the mode and see big behavior change. This final action should be very helpful as we go forward with making these changes. Currently, we don't have good data to inform decisions and priorities, which is rather frustrating. So information about this will help us prioritize transportation improvement. Next slide. Here's some other changes that we made. So we have removed some references specifically to EVs to account for potential for hydrogen in vehicles. Number two, from feedback from planning, we have taken away a reference to a 10-year plan as we hope to get there sooner, and we've broadened this action to include all building types. We have made some small updates to actions 3 and 4. We were not able to make stronger statements about using specific greenhouse gas reductions to guide all decisions, largely as the modeling that we have is aggregated by Big Move. And also many of the actions that we agree are very important do not have large associated reductions at this point. So these are two actions that point to moving toward utilizing greenhouse gas reductions going forward. However, still thinking about equity and co-benefits as well. Number 5 is not new, but it helps us remind us to start embedding this throughout the district. We want people to think about how to best do this in a meaningful way. Really don't want to engage people in an exercise in box ticking. Want to have people carefully consider emissions when it is appropriate, and also acknowledge that sometimes it isn't, and it doesn't have to be thought of in a deeper manner. Slide 19. So here are some of our next steps. From here, we need to develop and implement a strategy to engage the community on this plan. We really need residents and businesses on board. This is still a technical plan, and we need to put more work into communicating it out. We want to build community, we want to make this fun, and we want to start celebrating early actions as we start to take them. This work and its priority must be integrated into financial plans, work plans, and budgets. And finally, we need to keep thinking of co-benefits, equity, climate change adaptation and vulnerability, and also more broadly sustainability at every step of the way. Next slide. On these last few slides, we've just highlighted a couple of the actions that we are really excited to get going on immediately. So the first one is to continue with the implementation plan for the greenhouse gas flare, the landfill gas flare project. A great example of a strong lever with very big impacts that we want to pull ASAP. Further, we hope to be able to utilize that gas in the future. The second action, during COVID, there are lots of opportunities to develop and prepare excellent materials that we can disseminate after after things change. Next slide. Here are two other examples of things that are pretty much ready to go that have big wins and large reduction opportunities. Also, co-benefits associated with tourism and business opportunities. As we mentioned, and I believe we agreed upon last time, we are really not looking into getting into the vehicle charging business, just like we wouldn't open a gas station. This is all about enabling and facilitating this to happen. Next slide. Another thing that we want to do right now, particularly given the current context, is to get communicating. So firstly, we need to communicate outward. Great opportunities in the near future, given the amount of free time people have. I would love to run a talk or a Climate Change 101 course that could happen every week or so over the next few weeks. A lot of people with the ability to connect remotely right now with more time on their hands. Another interesting idea is trying to learn from COVID. You know, really fascinating changes have been happening in our society that have resulted in really big greenhouse gas emissions reductions, but a lot of other heartening things have happened. I, for one, have been amazed at how much people have cooperated toward a movement that doesn't necessarily directly enable them or benefit them. We've got orders of government cooperating very effectively. We have competing government parties working together. So it'd be a really interesting thing to convene a community conversation around this, to share some data, and to invite people to discuss how we can take some of the lessons learned from this event and try to apply it to more broadly to tackling climate change. The next action on this slide is looking more inward. So talking about climate change within our organization, there's a lot of interest in this, and people in all sorts of different divisions and orientations within the district are excited. So we need to keep and build that communication within the organization as well. So to conclude, our recommendation is that the District of Squamish approve the Community Climate Action Plan. And Chris Wickham and I now welcome your discussions and comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Picketts. That was great. Council.
Is this the time you tell me my mic was muted the whole time?
No, we heard you loud and clear. Okay, are there any questions? Councillor Anderson. Go ahead, Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Picketts, for orienting me regarding the new item that's been inserted regarding developing a scoring system to evaluate rezoning applications. I see it's under big move number 2, page 33 of the plan. There are often trade-offs and layers of objectives and goals to be considered when we look at rezoning applications. I note that the timeline identified for this particular initiative of developing a scoring system is long-term. My question is, can we assume that the proposed scoring system will be brought to council for review at some point?
That's an excellent question. I'm not entirely familiar with the navigation through how those happen, but I would assume that planning, we will be in discussion with planning and develop that, and that it would, maybe Jonas would be a good person to hand it over to answer that much more cogently.
Jonas, do you
if I may, through Mayor?
Yes.
Yes, definitely that will come to council for approval. The reason why we asked for a little bit more time is exactly that we want to make sure that it's not just a scoring system for one aspect, that it encompasses other aspects like affordable housing and all the other things that our OCP policies ask for in the rezoning process.
Thank you.
Any other questions, Councillor Anderson, or are you good for now?
I have a couple of comments. I can wait for later if you wish.
Okay, great. There's a few more hands. Councillor Stoner, did I see your hand? No. All right. Councillor Pettengill.
Thank you. So I really appreciate a number of the changes. Maybe I'll go into that in the summary. I did want to dig into big move number 2 and just try and get a better understanding of why the sort of headline goal is a doubling of active and transit use. Because if I look at what's happening today, I think we'd probably see most likely a diminishment of the use of that, but there's been a significant diminishment of combustion and single-use vehicles as well. And so by the way we're measuring it, as outlined in the report, we would see a failure, but I think what's going on the ground is actually quite successful, notwithstanding some of the other challenges that are happening. And on the flip side, who knows what happens, but in 10 years from now, we might see a doubling of our population, therefore a doubling of transit and trail use, but also a doubling of or tripling of single-use combustion or EV vehicles. And so I'm concerned that by measuring a change in active transit, we're not really measuring or targeting the thing we're trying to change, which is those single-use vehicles. And so I understand that doubling transit use might be a wonderful tactic or action, but I don't think it's the headline thing that we're trying to solve or change. And so can you explain why we wouldn't focus on the headline sort of, this is the thing we need to change?
Mr. Pickett?
Yes, that's a great question, and it's worth thinking about. Our previous projection was more oriented toward a reduction. So we reframed it to be a little bit more bold. My personal opinion is that I completely agree with you. I think you're correct in that we'll reduce emissions through a number of ways. A big one may be reduction in the number of trips taken. However, I would still stand by that being a reasonable metric of the like a representation of the number of emissions. I wouldn't see the net number of trips being reduced hugely in the next 10 years. Please feel free to disagree or expand on that further. But it is definitely a noteworthy point that you're right that we do undersell the working remotely or removing some of those trips. So I definitely acknowledge that point.
Yeah, and I think I understand, like, if it's tough to, I understand this might be very challenging in the current modeling studies. It'll be challenging to reduce the number of single-use vehicle trips and so on. But I think to me that says then we should focus our efforts elsewhere, or we need a more creative solution because we're not solving the problem, and the problem is the number of single vehicle use. And so again, and so I guess it gets at my next question, understanding for staff, because I'm a bit unclear reading the report. So from staff's perspective, is the most important outcome of all of this to be 45% below all of our emissions, not just the ones that we think are easy to influence and count, but all of them by 2030? Is it to have a 20,000 ton reduction in landfill waste by 2030, or is it to do flaring by 2030? So which of those three things do we think is the most important measure of our success and the most important thing for us to achieve?
Mr. Wickham?
So, sorry, I can, through the chair, if I understand the question, the target that we have is to reduce our in-scope emissions by 45% from the 2010 baseline. That's what we're after. We're after a reduction in emissions. That's our headline goal. There are other actions we can take that we can reduce things that are not in that inventory, such as helping encourage people to repair items instead of buying new items, which would reduce our Scope 3 inventory, to take our repair cafes as an example. And there are other items that we're working on there as well that would be somewhat more indirect. I'm not sure I understand. Councillor Pettengill mentioned a couple of particular action items, such as flaring. Flaring from a landfill is one particular action item that happens to have a very significant impact, and we're working on right now. It's an active project right now that's going on in the engineering department. But that's a secondary. That's an action that feeds to a bold move that feeds to the feeds to the overall goal of reducing our community's emissions.
I guess what I'm trying to get at is an understanding, because when I read through the report, there seems to be a very high priority on the actions, and for me, they are the lowest priority. And so I'm trying to get a sense of, what's important, the actions or the outcomes. So for me, if I happen to still be on council in 2030, I'm saying, was this plan successful? For me, the measure of success was, were we 45% below all of our emissions? And that is all of them. And I think for me, the debate about scope is still open. I understand we may not tackle the whole scope the next couple of years, but I think that the IPCC doesn't make exclusion for what's easy to count or it's easy to influence. It's 45%. And so, I think for me, that is our target. Secondary to that, we have objective measures of 20,000 ton reduction here, 2,500 ton reduction here.
Councillor Pettengill, Councillor
Yep.
Pettengill, are you going to ask a question? Because we can save comments for when there's a motion on the floor.
Okay. So what I'm getting at then is staff sort of looking at this, we will be successful if we complete all the actions, or will we be successful if we hit a 20,000 ton reduction in landfill waste, a 2,500 ton reduction in transportation, and so on? And I want to make sure, I want to understand if we're on the same page of how we're measuring success, because I'm not measuring it by the completion of actions, I don't think. And so our staff on the same page as me on that.
So I'm just going to jump in here
Absolutely.
and remind Councillor Pettengill that we have a council motion in which we declared a climate emergency and require our community to hit the 45% target. And staff have been clear that we don't have influence right now over all of the emissions, but we expect over the years that more legislation will come our way, different rules, or we may find ourselves with additional powers. So I don't really want this to turn into a debate between one councillor and staff. I think our climate emergency motion was very clear about what our target is. And staff have been very clear about, in this report, about where we currently have leverage and where we don't. And that's not to say that we won't continue to lobby, advocate, pursue emissions reductions in the areas where we can still influence. So I'll turn it over to staff, but I'll ask you, Councillor Pettengill, to keep that in mind as well. So Mr. Picketts and then Mr. Wickham.
Sure, and through the chair, Councillor Pettengill, I appreciate your comments, and I don't know if you were thinking, I think you were mostly thinking things that we currently consider in scope. And I agree with you in that the net reduction is more important than any individual strategy. And I think there's an understanding amongst amongst staff that we're going to be quite pragmatic and quite nimble as we go forward in this. We are going to be constantly looking for other and new actions. That's part of the reason I really came around to it. I'm now pretty excited about the fact that we have a little bit of a shortfall. This is an incomplete plan. We need to go beyond what we already have. Also, to come back to your first comment, I do think you made a good point regarding Big Move 2, how our outcome doesn't necessarily speak to all of the actions that we've taken within it about the doubling. We have left a footnote in there that a doubling of alternative transportation trips correlates to a 15% decrease. So I would hope that most readers would notice that those are kind of reciprocal at this point, and that there's an assumption that more transit equals less emissions. And maybe as we go forward, if people are commuting less, et cetera, we can update that outcome around that. I would think that this is something currently a local government doesn't have a ton of levers to influence how much someone works from home, for instance. Although there are actions laid out here getting more people working in Squamish, which we're very happy about and can address some of those big sources. Thank you.
Mr. Wickham?
So I would just add to that to just reiterate that council gave us a task. Task was hit the IPCC numbers. This is our plan of how to hit those numbers, and we've acknowledged that it is obviously a lot of projections, and a lot of work to be done on these individual actions. The actions, I mean, clearly are what we'll be attacking. We've committed to an annual check-in on our progress and an update to the plan every 3 to 5 years. And we'll decide in a few years whether we need to update that plan. But the point of this is to get carbon out of the atmosphere and not the tick boxes.
Do you have another question, Councillor Pettengill?
Well, I just hoping I can clarify a little bit, and I apologize. I shouldn't have mixed issues. I wasn't trying to focus on the scope piece at this point. I'm just trying to wrap my head around, because some of these things are so challenging and it's evolving so quickly, and COVID has opened up a whole world of new contexts, opportunities, and challenges. So I'm just, again, it's not clear to me if we are looking to first and foremost accomplish all the actions, and then hopefully we will achieve these projections, or those aren't really so much projections. That is our sort of commitment, and we understand, we're going to learn and adjust, and we may not hit those, but that 20,000 tons in waste, that is our commitment, and we will adjust our actions, with agility, quickly as things come on the ground, so that council doesn't become an obstacle with the sort of actions underneath. I really want to approve that 20,000 ton reduction and have staff feel really empowered to be agile, to adjust, and to tweak actions without coming back to us in 3 to 5 years for reevaluation. And so I'm looking for some sort of assurance, which didn't quite come to me in the current reading of, is it the actions that are leading everything is falling from that, or is it that 20,000 ton reduction or that 2,500 ton reduction? Those are the sort of primary things where council is setting this is the expectation, and staff is kind of giving us an FYI on some of the actions, but staff is going to be constantly working and tweaking and adjusting those actions.
Go ahead, Mr. Wiggum.
Through the mayor, I think many of these actions will need to come through council. And I can assure council that, for example, over the weekend, Mr. Picketts and I and other staff were exchanging emails about a new potential idea that we might be able to implement in about a year at the landfill that might take out even more gases. So this isn't in the plan yet, because we only heard about it over the weekend. So this isn't at all set in stone, and staff are certainly feeling empowered to take these actions and run with them and react in a nimble manner.
Any other questions from council? Does someone want to put a motion on the floor then? Councillor Herford?
Sorry, I'll move staff recommendation that the District of Squamish approve the Community Climate Action Plan.
Does someone want to second that? Councillor Anderson seconds. Do you want to speak to your motion, Councillor Herford?
Sure, I'll be brief. I was lucky enough to be involved with this, the workshops and some of the steps along the way as this plan was developed. There are a long list of things that aren't in the plan, and I think it's important, as Councillor Pettengill was alluding to in his questions earlier, that there's still work to do, and there's still reductions to, or there's still sort of, I guess, emissions to be calculated and then and thus reduced. Hopefully, but we've got a long list of things that we do know about and changes that we can affect now, and we should get on with it. And I've been thank you to staff for all the work on this, and in advance for all the work going forward. And I look forward to seeing recommendations from this come out in as we work on other related policies and budget 2021. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other? Yes, Councillor Anderson.
Yes, I'm happy to approve this report. I think that staff have done some thoughtful work, not only in fine-tuning the specific actions, but also in the overall communication strategy element as well. One opportunity in the way of a co-benefit that we might not lose, or we might keep in mind, is air quality. Council has received correspondence recently from a person regarding air quality issues, and it's something not to lose sight of, that this is an important co-benefit. There are two air quality issues outlined in the Air Quality Management Plan that encompasses Squamish, and that is highway emissions from the highway traffic. The other is wood burning, that is old wood stoves in particular. Both of these are energy issues, transportation issues that are peripherally at least addressed in this plan. So it's an opportunity to mention air quality as a co-benefit in our public communications. Secondly, I do appreciate that there is attention in terms of goals to local jobs, and that it is not so easy to spell out specific actions in that type of economic development strategy. But I do hope that we won't lose focus on this need. One of the OCP policy items that is cited in the report to council does specifically address long-distance commuting to work. However, throughout the theme, I found it actors of the OCP specifically address this. So I do hope that we don't lose focus on local jobs as part of our climate action strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. I have Councillor Stoner and then Councillor Race.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're Councillor Race. You're after Councillor Stoner.
Yep, got it. Thank you.
Happy to support the motion that's on the floor, and just want to thank staff for all the work that's gone into this to date, and for the changes that were made since our last discussion. The executive summary in particular looks fantastic, and really happy to see the changes that were made there. A very minor comment is that on the third page of the executive summary, the same diagram that was shown on slide 10 of this presentation says the actions outlined in this plan will reduce emissions 38,300. There's a small clause there that's missing, either by 38,000 or to 38,000. I'm not sure which one. Very minor, but important given that it's such a great graphic. To me, this plan is really, really important. It shows us what actions we can take to achieve the goals that council set out in our climate emergency. We know that it won't be easy, but this is what gives us the roadmap of where we can go, what actions we need to take immediately, where action is needed, and we know where that action might be difficult, but it gives us an identification of where we need to take those steps, and how we prioritize that work. And so there has been some, I want to address some of the criticism in the community about having brought on a consultant to do this work, and a tendency for council to bring on consultants to inform some of our policy work. But I think that this really demonstrates how important it is to have data-informed decision-making, and doing this type of work was really critical to give us a foundation to show us what those next steps are, to be able to measure progress along the way. And also identify where the data is missing for that informed decision-making in the future, and highlight where more effort needs to go into collecting that data. So just wanted to speak to that specifically, and thanks to staff and the consultants that we did have to give us this information and the roadmap that we have going forward, and looking forward to all the very heavy lifting work that we now need to do to push it forward. So thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Stoner. So next up is Councillor Race, and then I have Councillor Pettengill and Councillor French.
Thank you. First of all, let me say I am supporting this motion. I was not present for the declaration of an emergency. I was away on holiday, and I was not present, as you know, last month when this was discussed at the Committee of the Whole. But I do think I have maybe a slightly different view on climate change, but I do think it is changing. And I think these are good moves to make. If you take the climate change issue out of it, I think there are a whole bunch of other benefits from these moves for a more livable and successful community. So on that basis alone, I would support it. But climate is changing, and I had to give a talk to a bunch of kids a couple of years ago, welcoming them to Squamish, and did some research and found out that about 10,000 years ago there was a kilometer of ice over our heads, and clearly it has changed since then. Most of that before the Industrial Revolution started. I was at a trip to the Antarctic, and one of the speakers on the trip talked about the advance and retreat of ice fields and so forth, and I won't go into the length and breadth of that. It was a very interesting discussion. But he made two comments, and going back over history, this is eons, literally, you can draw a mean line, or mean temperature line, and we are still below it. And so his comment was that we are still coming out of an ice age. And the second comment he made about that is that means that as a society, and this is worldwide, we have designed our society, our infrastructure, our habitation plans, cultivation, and so forth to an ice age standard. That means something is going to have to change. I mean, there were once dinosaurs in Antarctica, I found out, as well as in the Arctic. So clearly there has been different climates in this world. And so I don't want to debate a lot of this stuff. I know this doesn't necessarily coincide with things. The only point I would make out of that is in Big Move 6 when it talks about some of the financial allocations. I think we have to keep in mind some of the other things, like adaptation is something that might be to a certain extent inevitable. And so I think those types of things have to also come into the decision. As I say, I would support this regardless of climate change issues, which I do believe in. I'm not a denier. But I would support this because I think there are other benefits, like Councillor Anderson said, from these moves. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Race. Councillor Pettengill.
Thank you. This is a topic I'm fairly passionate about. I've become quite passionate about, and I appreciate very much the work, the changes that have gone in, especially like the splitting of the timelines and the challenge levels on some of the actions. And I very much appreciate, I've seen outside of Municipal Hall the passion that staff have in their personal lives for these topics, and have had opportunity to have conversations with staff members. And I know the creativity and the desire to deal with this, and I'm really thankful to be in a community that has that and a staff that is working for that. And I guess that is part of the reason why I've been so insistent, and I was a little bit hesitant, might have tweaked it a little bit if I had my way. But just to, from the council piece, make sure it's clear that those 2,500 ton higher level objective numbers are the priorities, so that staff feel they don't always have to come back to us. In my mind, I want staff to just run and adjust actions and get moving and be creative, and I don't want to be an obstacle at all, because I know how smart and great our staff are at this, and so I want to make sure that we stay out of the way, and so that was part of my apprehension there. The other piece of this, and I appreciate the correction on the wood fiber numbers and the acknowledgement that we're still not including Fortis. Thankfully, that hasn't happened yet. We know they're about to run out of their environmental assessment certificate. And so there are lots of opportunities for us on the lobbying side in terms of letters, what ministers we write to, speak to, when we go to UBCM, and permits and leases and OCP and zoning bylaw. We have lots of levers. We may not be always as successful as we want, but knowing the potential impact of that, I think council has a responsibility too in addressing our declaration. And so if we're going to keep our declaration as it is, and I firmly believe in it as it is, I hope that staff and the community will help to hold us accountable for our piece of the declaration. I think this plan is a wonderful part of that. And then, I hope that we can play our part as well too, which I think is a fairly significant part. And I want to thank staff for all the work and the changes here.
Thank you. Councillor French.
Thank you. I too will be supporting the motion, and I acknowledge the work that was put into this, not just by our District of Squamish staff members, but the consultants who were brought in to bring it all together. I'm particularly looking forward to the move that will see us increase the amount of kitchen waste and organic waste that will be diverted from the landfill. As someone who was trained from a very young age to turn food waste into usable soil, it's a total no-brainer for me. So looking forward to putting all of this into motion. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor French. I'll just say that I am grateful to the climate leadership team that stepped up in our community to help us out with this report and really guide our actions. There's so much talent in Squamish, and I just really appreciated those folks volunteering their time to work with our staff to make this plan a reality. And to our staff for recognizing that the goal is the reduction in GHGs, and we know we're going to need to be flexible, and it almost seems like every week we're exposed to a new technology or a new idea that may influence how we implement this plan. So I look forward to going on this journey with all of you and seeing what we can achieve before the end of our term as we put this plan into action and really set a new course for our community as we approach 2030 and then look forward to 2050. So with that, I will call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you so much. Okay, so next on our agenda is the 2020-2021 Road Rehabilitation Program. This is the RFQ award. So we should have Mr. Morwood joining us. There he is.
I'm on the line yet. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Great. Thank you. My name is Jesse Morwood, Capital Projects Manager for the district. As you mentioned, presenting on the 2021 Road Rehabilitation Program RFQ award. So the district recently issued an RFQ for a 2-year contract for all the road paving in Squamish. We did a few things slightly different this year than last. First of all, this is a 2-year contract with options to extend for 3 consecutive years, up to 5 years total. The reason we did this is it takes a fair bit of time and money for us to develop the tenders or the RFQs, as well as for the bidders to bid. I'll talk a bit more in a second about it, but we only have one bidder traditionally. So by having a longer year contract and ability to extend it, it really kind of saves everybody a lot of time and money. The other different thing we did this year was our pricing historically has been certainly on quantity of paving, but also on location. We changed it up a little bit this year so that the pricing schedules that we have from the bidder is purely based on quantity of paving. So, for example, it's a kind of a tiered system, a 3-tiered system. So, for small jobs like a small patching job, there's one price for a kind of a small section of road or a section of road, another price, and then for the bigger projects, bigger road kind of repaving, it's a third price. And what you do is you get economies of scale for the larger projects, and you get a better pricing. The benefit of this system is that we don't have to define the roads where we're planning on paving. So this is really important when you're doing a multi-year paving program that's going over a number of years. We can just pay based on the quantity we do rather than the location. So as far as where we're paving, we obviously follow the paving master plan to some degree. It's a kind of a guideline. We look for coordination with other capital projects, such as water work we're doing this year and the active transportation work we're doing this year. We also try to take advantage of development work that's going on. So there is one project we're potentially going to team up with, or 2 actually. But they're kind of moving parts. So our list is, we have a short list of paving projects, but it's still being defined, and we'll finalize the list fairly shortly here. So we posted this RFQ to BC Bid. We received one bid from Alpine Paving. Receiving one bid is pretty typical in this year. It's pretty typical. So this paving program, our total budget is $1.2 million. This is a unit price contract. So what that means, and based on what I was saying earlier, based on a quantity of paving, we can really adjust the amount of paving that we do on any year. So it gives us a lot of flexibility to adjust the paving budget to our yearly budgets if they were to change. This brings me to the resolution. That's a mouthful as usual. That the District of Squamish award a contract to the district to 2-year 2021 road rehabilitation program and asphalt repairs to Alpine Limited for up to $1.15 million, with an option to extend for 3 consecutive 1-year terms for a total of 5, and the mayor and council, the mayor and corporate officer be authorized to execute.
Thank you, Mr. Morwood. Any questions from councillors? Councillor French and then Councillor Pettengill.
Thank you. I'm wondering, so the resolution is specifically worded 2-year 2020-21 road rehabilitation program. And then we have consecutive 1-year terms after that. Does the specific wording in the resolution have anything to do with the notion of not binding future councils to contracts and agreements?
Through the mayor, the intention again was for this wording and for the contract was to give the district the flexibility to not have to, if we're happy with the contract and we continue to get competitive pricing or the best pricing we think we can get, is to allow us to not have to go back out to tender. It didn't have anything to do specifically with future councils, but it has that benefit, I guess.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Pettengill?
Thank you. Somewhat related to Councillor French's question, although slightly different angle. We just had a presentation about co-benefits with climate action and through various approaches trying to get the number of vehicle trips down one way or another. And so for that reason, I'm pleased about the 3 optional years at the end. Yeah. But I'm wondering, as we're working towards that, in your mind, is part of what we're doing trying to get that budget down? When we look at our climate action plan now, and I believe that the more the roads are used, the more expensive they are to maintain. So if we can get road use down, in theory, maybe we can relax on the paving budget, and this gives it gives us some room to do that, or am I being a bit optimistic there?
Through the mayor, really interesting point. Yes, so to some degree, asphalt road wear and tear is affected by the number of vehicles on the road. So, I couldn't tell you a percentage, but that does have an impact. Our paving master plan and our 5-year budget or projected budgets for paving is based on current conditions and what's out there and the current use. And so that's the plan that we're following and intend to follow. If something changes, this contract has the flexibility to change as well. We don't have to spend the full amount. We can reduce it. We can spend that money on alternate treatments or whatever. So it does give us flexibility, and it is possible there's some reduction in cost or our budget with reduced vehicles.
Any further question? Okay, Councillor Race.
Thank you. Just back to Councillor French's point, if the decision was made to go ahead in the 3rd or 4th or 5th year, would that be a council decision or a staff decision? I can understand the efficiencies of having the option and the efficiencies of bidding and purchasing, but it's ultimately not a council decision whether to go with a contract for the next year or go back out to tender?
Yeah, through the mayor, my understanding is that with this resolution, that would be council's having a say on the option to extend. So at that point, it would come down to a staff level decision on the yearly basis.
Thank you.
Councillor Stoner?
Just to follow on that point, to clarify that council still directs how much money goes into the paving budget every year through the budget process. So correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions, council? Seeing none, is there a motion? Councillor Pettengill?
Yeah, I'll move it.
Moving the staff recommendation, seconded by Councillor Stoner. All those in favor?
Oh, can I just make a comment?
Oh, sure.
Yes, I'd like to make.
So, yeah, thank you. So I will be supporting this. I do appreciate the 3 optional years at the end. Just picking up on one of Mr. Morwood's points, though, I now that we have our climate action plan and we sort of realize the challenge before us, I hope that across the board, and I think we are, but just want to reinforce the idea that we're thinking about whether we are leading the change or following the change, and is this another opportunity to try and lead that change, find some co-benefits, and maybe do some less paving because there's less cars on the road, which is what we want. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson?
Yes, I'd like to speak also in favor of the resolution proposed. But I'd like to draw attention to a comment made in the report to council that I very much appreciate. It's under project background, pointing out that road rehabilitation is also important for active transportation portions of the road. And poor road conditions can lead to distraction, reactions, and changed behavior on the part of drivers in certain circumstances, which can compromise the safety of pedestrians and cyclists. I've seen this, observed this, experienced this personally, both in Squamish and in the city. I think that I think it's an important observation that good roads are good for everyone, including the cyclists and the pedestrians that share the roadway.
Thank you. Any other comments? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Are you? Okay, you're shaking your head.
I'm just messing up.
Okay. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Council, we'll do the next item and then we'll take a 10-minute recess just so you can all get up and stretch. So next up is our Development and Project Communication Policy Amendment. And I believe Mr. Vilniuskas is joining us. There he is.
Yes, I'm here.
I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Hold on a second.
Good day, Council.
Hold on.
Jonas, we're just getting your presentation up on the screen. There we go. Go ahead.
Perfect. Good day, Council. My name is Jonas Vilniuskas, Director of Community Planning. And today I'm bringing forward a proposed amendment to the district's development and project communication policy. So, next slide, please. So the objective of this report is to introduce an amendment that would replace or substitute the public information meetings. Next slide. So the public information meetings live in our development and project communication policy. The policy has been in place since 2013, and it essentially establishes the way we communicate new development projects to the public. So it sets the requirements for development signage, requirements for, or a protocol for publicizing applications on Showcase, as well as the holding of public information meetings. Next slide, please. So the public information meetings have been traditionally held in person, and obviously with the current state of public health, that is no longer an option for the time being. And so this amendment is fairly important for a number of applications in order to continue moving in the process pipeline to be considered by council. We think that there are a number of tools online that could be useful, just as good, if not better, to the in-person public information meetings, just because people don't have to show up at a certain time. They can review the information online when it's convenient for them, and give us their feedback also at their convenience. The public information meetings right now, we wait for 10 requests before scheduling a meeting, unless staff determine that the application is important enough or significant enough to hold a public information meeting, in which case we ask the applicants to hold it regardless of how many requests we get. So the proposed amendment would essentially try and, it's fairly general, it would try and mimic the public information meeting advertisement. So we would be, maybe let's go to the next slide. So we would be connecting it to our showcase. What happens now is an application comes in, and the first thing we do once we're satisfied with the submission is we post it on our showcase. And through the showcase, people are able to request that public information meeting and provide us with comments or questions. So we would replace the request for public information meetings with this new tool. Right now, we're looking at story maps. Then it would get advertised in a newspaper with a link provided in the ad, and we would also mail out notices to residents or owners within 100 meters of the subject site where the application is. And we would provide a 14-day period for receiving any questions. Now, the 14 days is because right now the public information meetings have to take place at least 14 days before the application is being considered by council. So this essentially replicates that there's going to be at least 14 days for people to ask questions before a decision is made on the application. Comments would be unrestricted, so we would only apply that 14-day period to application questions so that we can clarify things with the public. Next slide. So in the report and here on the slide, I've highlighted in red on the slide, in yellow in the report, the actual change. We're keeping it fairly general just to allow for adaptation of different tools. We think for now Story Maps could be a good tool. It's a software that we have through our GIS subscription, so it doesn't cost us anything. It's fairly easy to use because there could be a high demand for it, not just by planning, but also engineering and other departments who do municipal projects to communicate with the public. And the public information meeting process was never really established in the actual policy. It was added as an appendix, which is much more detailed. So we're also trying to keep this part of the policy fairly general. Next slide. And that's the proposed resolution or recommendation that the District of Squamish approve the amendment to the Development and Project Communication Policy. And that is it.
Thank you. Councillor Stoner, and then Councillor Race.
Thank you. Through the chair, appreciate staff bringing this forward and trying to find creative ways to continue to move forward business in a way that allows for public engagement. I think my biggest concern with this is that technology can be fantastic, but there's also a very large learning curve often, and there can often be discrepancies in who has access to technology and is able to use it. And so I'm just curious from staff's perspective, how do we ensure that we're accounting for fair access to information by all of our citizens, especially those who might not have stable access to internet, or now the library is closed, they don't have access to computers. How do we start to bridge those gaps and ensure we're not leaving folks behind?
And that's a really good question. I think that there's other right now, and if we adopt this new measure, there will be other opportunities for people to review the information and ask changes. Unfortunately, now we are very restricted. The municipal hall is closed, so people can't come in here and review the application, for instance. So we are heavily relying on online access, even just through email to staff to ask questions. You know, on the development side, usually we have the phone number where people can call. So the municipal hall would be closed, but people would be still able to call in, ask questions of staff, in addition to email. But yeah, this has presented challenges for us that we have never anticipated, because you know there's always an opportunity for somebody to walk in the hall and ask the questions. We can open the application, but we don't have that ability right now. And you're right, there's going to be a learning curve for sure. It's not going to be perfect, but I think because we do have a large volume of applications, that hopefully, you know, the adaptation period is going to be pretty fast. We're going to have lots of practice with this tool.
Follow-up?
Yes.
So I just want to confirm that there are opportunities still for people to provide comments that are not just in written format. Folks can still call or access staff. That is still an option.
Yes, people can still call us, mail us. Faxing hasn't been an option for a while, but that's about the only thing.
Okay, so I just would want to make sure that on any online platform and in all like newspaper messaging that is made as clear as possible, and that we trial this in select projects first that are perhaps less controversial before we go forward with some of the others. Just being cognizant of which ones we do use that kind of testing period, which projects we're using it for.
Yes, we perhaps through you, Mayor, we could allow for a longer testing period, because I know we have a number of projects. You know, since COVID situation arose, kind of a lot of files have gone on pause, and now people are really anxious to continue on. So I know that there will be a lot of interest. But what we could do, rather than restrict the kind of which files go forward with this, is we could allow for a much longer period where we're you know, keeping it open, not taking applications to council before we've kind of we think we figured the system out.
You good, Councillor Stoner? Okay, I've got Councillor Race, then Councillor Anderson, and then Councillor Pettengill. Go ahead, Councillor Race.
Thank you. Thank you. So I might have missed it in your presentation, but who creates the presentation or the thing that would go onto our website? Is that planning staff or is that the developer?
Through you, Mayor. So that's another good question. It would be our staff would put together the essentially web page, which is the story maps function. We would require the developer to provide us with a video presentation, which we would review to make sure that it's not, you know, a sales pitch, that it covers the important aspects of the development, and then that would get uploaded. And that's really, that would mimic the public information meeting process that we have now, which is a developer prepares the presentation and they deliver it. It's meant to be an interaction between a developer and the public, and staff are there to simply observe, answer any district-related questions, and then take all the feedback.
Thank you. That was my concern, was because those meetings that I've attended have been developer-led, and so it is the developer not making a sales pitch, hopefully, but explaining the project. Just so you don't start the conversation off in a vacuum. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Councillor Race. Councillor Anderson?
Yes, given that this is largely and even explicitly in response to the COVID-19 situation, this proposal that is before us, I'd like to ask whether it might be appropriate that there be a sunset clause attached to it. And I'll just relate two observations in support of that, or behind that question. Firstly, I should also say I support all of the comments that Councillor Stoner has made. I think that the loss of the for many situations, the loss of the public meeting format would be regrettable. However, there's a great variety of situations. My first consideration is that, as is related in the report to Council, public information meetings aim to provide the public with clear information about a development application. But that clear information for the public does not only happen or come from the proponents' representatives and also from planning staff. It also comes from the dialogue among the participants, quite often and importantly. So people's understandings and interpretations, and indeed information or new perspectives or ideas for certain issues that would connect to a project for the developer, come from dialogue. They come from people together in a room looking and hearing the same information together. That's one observation. The second is that there's a quote in the report to Council again: many larger local governments have been moving to online engagement tools well before the current COVID-19 pandemic. I do appreciate the qualifier larger here, because I do think that Squamish, as a small to medium-sized community, has some differences from, for example, the city of Vancouver. Neighborhoods are very different. Brackendale, or my neighborhood, have homes with multi-generation family ownerships and participants in a local meeting or neighborhood event. I think our neighborhoods are different than city neighborhoods, or I would hope so. And so these are considerations behind my question, whether there should be a new consideration once we're over this pandemic to return to a revised and evolving policy on public information.
Mr.
Through you,
Valencius?
Mayor.
Yep.
Yes, that is. This is a reaction to the current situation purely. The public information meetings absolutely have value that this is not going to be able to completely replace. And the intent is to just use this tool at the moment. When we get back to normal, I think that this tool has value to enhance the public information meetings. So in the policy change, we've proposed that replace or enhance, that's the language. So that I think having proponents produce a video that we can upload, that people can review for those that can't attend public information meetings, I think will still be useful. But yes, when we get back to normal, the intent is to go back to holding public information meetings, especially on applications that generate public interest.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Councillor Pettengill.
Thank you. And I just want to pick up on a couple of the comments that have been made, but tie them together, not just in terms of digital literacy, but more written reading and writing literacy. And I think that's one of the other valuable pieces of some of the in-person forums right now is you have that visual auditory presentation, and that can be really helpful. And it's, I think, also really important for these that it is a conversation that happens in public where there's a measure of accountability as well. And so I'm not sure that we're quite there yet, and I understand maybe we have to make some concessions given COVID, but I do have some concern, like it doesn't address the digital piece, but should there be a requirement for a Zoom meeting or something where there's a visual presentation, a means for sort of back and forth in somewhat of a community open setting? To me, those in general seem like pretty important pieces of the process. And so I'd just like your feedback about how we can or will accommodate that, or do we have expectations in the policy update around that sort of thing?
Through you, Mayor. So the intent for now was until we determine what other tools that are appropriate that can handle the volume is not to go to a live presentation. Although that is something that we will definitely explore the longer this takes. I think that there is a way to be transparent of what we hear from the public. So one of the functions that we could implement is all the questions that we receive from the public and the comments, we could review them, make sure it's, it's clean, and we could post that back up in the story maps page so that people, when they come in to view the project, they can see already what other people have said.
And I guess my concern there is that you're still depending on people being able to read and write to a large degree.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. There will be phone numbers provided so people can call us after they view the video, and they could give us comments that way. We can certainly highlight that in the advertisement and on the webpage.
Anything further, Councillor Pettengill?
Not at the moment. Thank you.
I have a couple of questions, Jonas. How many public information meetings do you think are in our funnel right now that are waiting?
That are ready to go to public information? That's probably around 10.
Okay. Is there an opportunity in the current situation so that if someone doesn't have access to a computer and may have normally done that through the library, which is currently closed, can they call City Hall and make an appointment to come in and review the plans? They would have to sit obviously at a separate table, or what kind of accommodation can we make right now when we're doing physical distancing?
We do not have an opportunity right now to open the doors and let somebody in. The municipal hall is closed to public, and we're treating. We sort of have a quarantine process for any paper copies that we receive or we send out. So that would be a challenge. We could arrange something where we can give people copies, but it can't happen in municipal hall, unfortunately. So the way we've been doing kind of deliveries and pickups, everything that comes in and sits in the box for a while before we touch it. And then we have a protocol for handing stuff out if people have to come in and pick something up. We meet them at the door, sort of thing, put it in a box, then we leave, then they come and pick it up. So there's no interaction.
I suppose, even in... Councillor Brace, are you just off to the side? Yes, he is.
Sorry.
Yeah, okay. I thought you were still there. All right. I'm a little bit nervous because even in the procedure bylaw amendments we made, that we really referenced that we would only have these electronic meetings in the future outside of the state of emergency if there was a health, environmental, or emergency reason to do so. And the change here that's proposed is really quite general, and I do share some of the concerns of my colleagues that we're taking an action within a state of emergency and a public health emergency, which actually doesn't feel ideal to me because we can't sort of dot the I's and cross all the T's in terms of access at this time. So I'm a little bit nervous, and I feel like if council is going to support this motion to go forward, there probably should be a second motion that says we'll review this at the end of the state of emergency. But I still feel like there needs to be a protocol for someone to be able to get the plans. And Councillor Pettengill's comments that, we're using a format here, and we're waiting for guidance from the province about how we may be able to do public participation. But developers do have the ability to use programs like Zoom and could get people to sign up and participate in an interactive session through that way, and yet we still may miss people that don't have access to technology. So I'm a little bit nervous with the wording of the change because it's not specific to the emergency at this time, and I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think how we could amend this the language to reflect the current state of emergency.
I'll think about it as well. I've got Councillor Herford and Councillor Stoner. Go ahead, Councillor Herford.
Thank you. I understand the current state of emergencies affected our ability to to process these requests and for things to sort of flow through our system. I am really hesitant with say like that number 10 that you came up with of projects that are ready for public hearing or a public information meeting. That could be quite a few units and quite a few portions of our town that touches without this traditional public information meeting. And as Councillor Anderson touched on that, I find that back and forth very important, and for there sort of to be and sparks other ideas in the room. And I find that those meetings can be very productive. And as I was reading it, I was sort of thinking about the implications of, hey, maybe this is a portion of our business that we can't do during a state of emergency, and do we just wait till we're out of it? And that's a delay of X number of weeks or most likely months, and that's one of the casualties where we don't have where we just don't have the ability to have that meaningful engagement. And I wonder, as we develop this and roll it out, how long is it going to take to be able to put together the first public information meeting, use it, dissect how it went, and before we do the 10 other ones, are we out the other side, and whether we should or better to just wait till we get through. So I'm curious how that was weighed, I guess, is just, what does a 3 or 4 month hypothetical stop right now look like? And yeah, I guess that's what where I'm at, whether this is something that we actually really need to do in an emergency. If we didn't approve this, what would happen, I guess, is the question, is the short version of that question.
Through you, Mayor. So I don't think we would unroll that, this at the same time on 10 projects. We would bleed them in one by one over probably a month period. I think the big unknown is how long that we're going to be in an emergency situation. If it's a couple of months, then it might not be detrimental. I think that there are some developments we know, financing that has been secured to go through the process has a deadline. And if they don't get to a certain point in the process, then they lose financing. So there will be a risk for sure for a number of projects if we just tell them that we're stopping at this point and we'll proceed when things get better. Also, there's some legal questions around that. The public information meetings are not something that the Local Government Act or the Community Charter requires us to do. So that means that this is part of our procedure bylaw, which is fine. But if it becomes something that essentially holds up the process, then there are some legal risks involved, I believe.
A follow-up, if that's okay.
Yes, go ahead. And I see Mr. Buxton has appeared, so he may also want to comment, but follow up, Councillor Herford.
Thank you. I see that that makes sense. We wouldn't do, all 10 at once, but I'm curious about, choosing a project to do the first one and really dissecting how it went and the lessons learned before we have multiples that could potentially, where we could have learned the lesson from the first one once it's gone all the way through. So as we roll this out, I understand we can keep our processes moving, and maybe there is a big slowdown as we go through the first one and dissect how that went before we green light the remainder and or whatever else is coming into the sort of the channel now, rather than so this gives us, I see approving this giving us the ability to do that, but I really think moving cautiously through that process is prudent, and I don't really know how to modify the recommendation here to reflect that, but I'd be okay doing a test run on one or maybe two projects, but I'm really hesitant for all the reasons that were mentioned from the speakers before me to just say right now that we are going to go this way with all the projects currently in the system and the ones now entering the system, given our state of emergency. So I don't know if you could speak to sort of the plan of rolling it out and how we learn the lessons and feel our way through this, given where we're at.
For you, Mayor, yeah, we can certainly take that precautious approach and test it out on two projects, have them go through that 14-day period before we unroll them. On other projects, I think, we're certainly going to learn how well the system works when we test two projects. I think my suggestion would be to test it on not just kind of no-brainer small applications, because those generally get very little interest from the public. So, a bit of a meteor project would be useful as well to find out how well it actually works. But certainly we can take a precautious approach in unrolling it.
Okay, my final comment would be to my fellow councillors, just to think of if there's a way that we want to put a number on a review time or a number of projects to run this with, and whether we check in on it or I'm not quite sure where I would feel more comfortable if there was something to that nature in here, but I don't have it all the way to a motion yet. So
Okay.
I'll wrap it up for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Buxton, you appeared on my screen. Did you have a comment?
Yeah, just more, hopefully you can hear me.
Yes, yeah.
Just more generally, if we can move a few of these through the process in the next few months, what we can hopefully avoid is a crush when we do get to the point of business returning to normal, that all of the applications are at the very same part of the process. And there'll be this crush of information and public information for the community and for council to do business. So if we can move some partway through the process, it doesn't become sort of a crush all at one time. We've got applications in different parts of the process, so we'll be very cautious about how we move this through and how we evaluate which ones are successful and which ones aren't. As Mr. Valeniscus notes, we are going to have to pick some that are a little bit more contentious to know if it's working. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. I now have Councillor Stoner, then Councillor Race, then Councillor Pettengill.
Thank you. I think it is important to note that public information meetings are not statutory requirements. They are part of our procedures or our bylaw, but they aren't a requirement. And I do think that, as staff have noted, it is important to try and be able to move work forward, given that we don't know when the end of this public emergency is going to be. That this is an opportunity for us to innovate a little bit. And I actually do think that, although I was the first one to kick off with some concerns around equity and access, this could actually hold a lot of potential for improving our process of public engagement and public information meetings. Yes, there's a lot of value in face-to-face and having folks show up in a room, but there's also often a lot of people who can't show up to those meetings as a result of scheduling or when it chooses to be or for whatever purpose. And so having some more tangible, long-lasting information on the website that people can go to when they have the time and the space is not a negative thing. I actually think that this could potentially be a very good way to augment what we expect of developers through our public information sessions and engagement. And so I am excited to test some of these things. I just think that we do need to be cautious, and I do think we need to come up with a process that would allow people to get access if they need a paper copy of the application, that we can leave it outside the front door of Municipal Hall and they can come pick it up and then call the planner and walk through it. And I realize that that is a lot of extra work, but I do think that that option needs to be there for folks who do not have access to the technology. And so that was my main point with my first comment, was just making sure that knowing that there has to be lots of safeguards in place with 2-meter distancing and social distancing, but that there is still some avenue there. If people do not have a computer at home, that they are not left behind in this process. But other than that, I am happy to let staff go forward, and my suggestion would be to put a motion subsequent to this that we review it by the end of 2020.
Thank you. Councillor Race.
Thank you. Similar comments to some that have come before. I agree. I would not want to just stop the process for the duration of this crisis. We don't really know how long that will be, and it could be a while. And so I think this is sort of a general comment on our country. I think we want to try to keep doing as many things as we can safely do during this crisis to keep some sense of normalcy. So I would like to see us explore something like this. I agree with other previous comments. I think my thought is that we might, at the end of this, end up with some kind of a hybrid. I think we might find that there are some positive things that come out of this that might, to Councillor Stoner's words, augment the existing process, and we could find some advantages to it. So I'm quite keen to go ahead on it. I take Councillor Herford's point. I think there's some safeguards already in the system, to the extent that I think we've done it before in Squamish. I know we have in the regional district. I think we get the first reading, for example, and people come out of the woodwork and say, "Hold on, we didn't have a public information meeting. We still have more stuff to talk about." We always have the ability, I think, as a council, to just order another public information meeting, just before second reading or even before third reading, quite separate from the public meeting that is required under the legislation. So I think there are safeguards there already. But I think the other safeguard that we've talked about is just adding language to the effect that the discretion of the Director of Planning, Director of Community Planning, could only be exercised during a public emergency that has been declared that restricts or prevents the holding of public meetings. And so something like that, which is more or less the regime we're under right now, would allow that discretion to be exercised. But if we're off business as usual, that couldn't be exercised. So I think that's all we need to do with the policy, is just place that kind of a qualifier on it. And then at the end of this, I think everybody's kind of in agreement on this. At the end of this crisis, when we sort of reflect on how it's gone, we might decide to change our policy anyway, to somehow incorporate some of these changes.
Thank you. Councillor Pettengill.
Yeah, I see that there's opportunity to improve our current process, but in situations like this, it always seems that the most vulnerable people get hurt the worst, and I'm just trying to be very cognizant of who is most vulnerable here and how will they be impacted, and I don't know that we've got the right balance yet. It would be my expectation that definitely the process is longer. We have people that would participate in these engagements who are now in line at the food bank and worried about, do they have a place to live and so on. And so I think that's a piece of this that we have to consider and find a way to accommodate. I would want to see some sort of, how's that public forum being handled, literacy skills, digital access,
schools. How are those things being dealt with? I don't think I've seen that there. And just listening to the discussion, I heard Councillor Herford talk about trying one, maybe two, and then it switched to Mr. Valniscus. Yeah, we can do a couple, and then Mr. Buxton said, yeah, we can start with a few. So we've already shifted how many we're pushing through all at once. And you know, I understand some developers may be up against financing. I see the banks being asked across the board to rethink their loans and so on. And so I think we should expect the banks to do their part to help some of these developers as well. We're not the only solution that these developers have. And for me, it's a real priority to make sure our citizens are well represented. We take a great deal of pride, I think, in our IAT2 work and our public engagement. And I think that's pretty important to me. So I would personally prefer to see a bit more, something a little bit more robust before I would approve these changes.
Councillor French.
Thank you. Well, I think that the concerns about access are definitely legitimate. I'm also feeling like those who really feel that they want to be a part of the conversation will find a way to get themselves injected into it. And if we can take steps to make it easier and more accessible for people who don't have smartphones and laptops and the technology needed, a way will be found. And just the thought of a second motion, Councillor Stoner has suggested end of 2020. I'd like to see that revisited in September. That's 6 months from now. Just think that a month out to revisit this. Thank you.
I'm just going to insert myself in the comment here. So I have a couple of things written that might improve this. So one option is in the event of a local or provincial state of emergency involving health, safety, or the environment, and where the Director of Community Planning determines appropriate, public information may be replaced, and so on with what you have there. Or alternatively, where the Director of Community Planning, in line with council's or the province's determination that there is an emergency due to health, safety, or the environment, determines it is appropriate, a public information meeting may be replaced. So I think for now, what I'm generally hearing from council is that we need to constrain this to the environment that we're in, and we need to test it. And so I would like that added paragraph to really be connected to an emergency for the time being. And then as we learn, I think I would put forward a second motion after this, which is to bring this back after to have gone through the process. And I think the community is going to let us know if this is not working for them, and then we can revisit it right in the moment. I mean, we don't have to say, well, nope, that was your public information meeting, and if you didn't like it, tough beans. I mean, if it really failed, then obviously our staff are going to work with the developer and say we need to try something a little bit more or a little bit different. So I don't think we should assume that we just get one kick at the can. And I don't want to paint developers sort of with this brush of, you know, you can wait till this emergency is over. There's projects that are sitting there that have affordable housing in them, or purpose-built rental, or environmentally sound buildings. Like, they're things that we want in the community. And so to say that we should just wait on something that's not required in the Local Government Act or the Community Charter, but is part of our bylaw, I think we should try something new. I think it will enhance over the long term what we're trying to do here. And it's not to say that we shouldn't eventually get back to face-to-face meetings, but there's a lot of people employed locally with construction, and it's the one industry that so far has been able to weather some of this storm. And so I do want to keep people in jobs that can stay in jobs. So I think moving some of these projects, trialing this, is actually important to me. So that would be my recommendation on the wording, one of those two options that I put forward to adapt that paragraph. And then I think hearing council's hesitation that we pass a second motion that asks this to be brought back and council, I don't know, 2, 3, to understand how we might improve it, or maybe it's working really well and we don't need to change anything. Mr. Vilniskis, any thoughts to the wording that I put forward, or the suggestion to bring it back after we trial this on a few proponents?
Absolutely. I think I have a good grasp of that first option you provided, which sounds like would be, I think, very fitting. It will make my job easier. I know the boundaries of when we're doing this. Yeah.
Okay. So council, if I read that again, in the event of a local or provincial state of emergency involving health, safety, or the environment, and where the Director of Community Planning determines appropriate, a public information meeting may be replaced, and then the rest of the paragraph. Yeah, Councillor Race.
Thank you. So I'm prepared to put forward a motion, so I'm make sure I'm clear. We want the staff recommendation with the addition of the wording that you have just proposed.
That's right.
Motion?
Yes.
And I'll let whoever's keeping the minutes add that wording.
I've got it.
Give it to the minute taker.
Have you got it? Okay, I've got it here when we're done. Okay, is
that motion? All
right, is there a seconder? Councillor Stoner seconds. You want to speak to it? Councillor Race?
I won't repeat my comments. I just made the comments a few minutes ago, and I have the same comments now.
Thank you. Anybody else comments? Councillor Stoner?
Yeah, I won't repeat my comments either, but I will flag that I was recently on a call with some councillors out of Vancouver, and they are also trying to assess how they're going to move forward with some public hearings. So a suggestion to staff, we're not the only municipality that's trying to deal with this, and I realize that Vancouver has a different legislative framework, but they are also trying to test some of those tools. So don't hesitate to reach out to your counterparts, because I know that we're not the only ones that are trying to navigate this new space.
Yeah, and we should be getting more direction from the province shortly. Councillor Pettengill and then Councillor Herford.
Yeah, so I initially, I think, said that I wasn't going to support this, but after listening to the mayor, I think I will. And what's changed my mind was, one, the reminder that this is not an obligation to support any of the projects that come through. And so with the discussion that we've had, I am comfortable moving forward on a trial basis to encourage anyone that feels like the process isn't working for them to reach out to me. I would encourage staff to really think about, when we do the review, what explicit requirements we should be adding to make sure this is a fair process, and would also propose to developers, it's going to take all of us to get through this. So I know everyone is stressed and scrambling right now, but the more you can do to go above and beyond even what our current policy says, to make sure people have been heard beforehand, I think that will serve us all very well. And so I'd encourage people to do that, and I will be supporting this.
Thank you, Councillor Pettengill. Councillor Herford.
Thank you. I'm happy with the changes. I was a little hesitant going into this that we were just making longer-lasting changes than we needed to. And I'm excited at the learning opportunity that we'll have here, and maybe this is a tool that we'll find useful for some projects or all projects going forward. So I'm happy with where we landed, given our circumstances, and encourage the public to participate as always as they can, and to provide as much feedback as they can as we develop these new policies. So thank you.
Thank you. Do I see any other hands? I'll just comment that Mr. Vilniskis, I thought your suggestion was a good one, that we make sure that people can see the questions that have been asked in this app, if that can be done, so that people get a sense that they're part of a greater conversation, or they see questions that they hadn't thought about asking. But, you know, I think that's one of the things that I always benefit from when I'm at a public meeting, is that I think, oh, I didn't even think of that question, and that's a really good question, and you get an answer for it. So I think being able to see the questions and answers, if we can manage that, is helpful. I think the communication that goes out for the first one we trial about all the ways that feedback can continue to come to council, and if possible, figuring out a protocol for sharing copies of the document or the plans will be helpful. But I'm happy to support the motion with the change in wording. So I'll call the question, and remember, just put your hand up if you're voting against. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Before we leave this topic, I wonder if council would entertain a motion to bring this back after we trial 3 projects for review. Councillor Herford, you move that? Or did you have a comment?
I'll move that, yes.
Okay, is there a seconder? Councillor Pettengill seconds. I think this is a good balance. We can, yeah, Mr. Valeniscus.
I just want to ask a clarifying question for
Yep.
me. What do we mean by 3 projects? So when the projects come to council, or when that 14-day or whatever period, the extended period, is over?
I think after 3 public information meetings have happened in this format, council would like this brought back to us for a review.
Before we proceed with any other public information meetings?
That's right. So
Okay.
the whole project doesn't necessarily need to get to us in council. I think we want to move through 3 separate project information meetings with proponents of different size or complexity, and then bring it back so that we can assess sooner rather than later whether this is really problematic for our community, or whether some things are working and it just needs a bit of a tweak. Councillor Herford, did you have a comment?
Yeah, if I could, my thought was that the information meeting isn't, in this context, done until that 14-day period has lapsed. So we do the 3 of them, and I think it's realistic to run one at a time, or start them a week apart or something. I don't think they need to be 14 days apart, but just I don't think we need to have them all launch I don't think they should all launch at the same time. But in this context, I would think the information session is complete once that 14-day period has transpired. And that's, of course, assuming that we're working with that 14-day period, and we don't want to extend it to longer as part of this change. But I'll leave that to staff.
Thank you. Does that help, Mr. Valeniscus?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Any other comments? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Valeniscus. Council, we're going to take a 10-minute break, so we'll come back at 3:20. Okay, we're back in our special business meeting. The next item on our agenda is item C1, the Ports Competitiveness Initiative. And I believe I am turning the mic over to Mr. Russell. Mr. Russell, are you there?
Still there.
I can't hear him.
My apologies, I had not taken the mute off.
Oh, we've all done that before. Go ahead, Mr. Russell.
Thank you. Financial Services provided a memo to council for distribution at today's meeting after reviewing a memo that the district received from the province earlier this year. The memo related to the province's port competitiveness initiative, and it made two recommendations. The two changes that were recommended, one related to BC assessment and the level of change that they could implement year to year. That was to increase it to CPI plus 1%. This, as a change in assessment, this becomes an input that we take when we get the assessment file from BC assessment. In the 2020 year, the port's land component increased 2.1%. This is in keeping with CPI in the prior year. Basically does not have a direct impact on us. Second change, which may have impacts in the future, is a delinking of the Class 4 major industry classes such that you can have a rate for the ports, which is capped, and you can have differential rates, which could be higher or lower than that for other major industry. Currently in the District of Squamish, there are no other property assessment in Class 4 major industry outside of the port. So at this point in time, that does not impact us. The port is currently, the port's tax rate is capped, and as part of the discussion that administration will be bringing forward next week to council of review of the 2020 tax rates, we will open a discussion as to whether or not council wishes to adjust the capped port rate. That is the gist of the memo. It does not have a direct impact on the District of Squamish at this point in time. And I'm be pleased to answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Mr. Russell. Council, any questions for Mr. Russell? We will be having our tax rate discussion next week in more detail. This was really for information. I'm not seeing any hands, Mr. Russell, so that may be your shortest presentation for the year.
I hope so. Thank you very much.
Okay. Motion to receive. Moved by Council Race, seconded by Council Herford. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Next up is C2, proposed exceptions to community enhancement policy. And I will turn it over to Ms. Klassen.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Today in front of you, we have a recommendation that Council authorizes exemptions to the community enhancement policy during the COVID state of emergency to support the District of Squamish employees redeploying to eligible organizations as per the community enhancement grant. And some of the examples of exceptions to the policy could be if there really is a grant and aid to these organizations, and it's likely that we could go over a 1% cap for grants and aid, and there's no application process. However, there is the eligibility still is there for nonprofit organizations, charitable organizations, care facilities, and licensed hospitals and athletic clubs. So that's still in the proposal or in the recommendation.
Council, any questions? Councillor Pettengill?
Sorry, I'm in my agenda, which I downloaded on Saturday. I think I just had the header and no. Is there an updated version with an actual policy update?
No, it's just an exception to the policy. We're just asking for a council motion to those exceptions during the COVID crisis or COVID state of emergency.
Okay, thank you. And so can you just clarify the first one around employees? I didn't quite understand how like the scenario or the context for that.
Through the Mayor, for some employees that are currently not as employed or engaged, like in rec center, we're looking to redeploy some of those employees to a nonprofit or charitable organization.
Okay, any other questions?
And
Oh, go ahead, Ms. Clausen.
this motion will allow us to just have exceptions to the community enhancement policy. The policy currently has procedures and that we should follow and caps to that, to those, to the policy. So.
Okay, I don't think I'm seeing any other hands. Does someone want to move this motion? Moved by Councillor Race, seconded by Councillor French. Any comments, anyone? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Ms. Claassen.
Thank you.
Council, we're moving on to item 10. This is the consent agenda. So if there's anything that you wish to pull, this is the time to do it. I am going to pull the letter from Ms. Struthers. That is item 18. Yeah, see, this is what happened in my screen. Councillor Pettengill?
So I wanted to pull 20, 22, and then I had understood from some correspondence that we're going to get some presentation on 24, which is Mrs. Giles or Giles? Louisa?
No, there's no presentation.
So if I pull it, is there an opportunity, will staff be prepared to speak to that one? Or will that be coming back to us at a different time? That was the air quality one.
I believe that if you want it to respond to, this is a motion to receive in this section. The next section is referred to staff.
Okay, just from the correspondence from staff, I had understood that someone was going to speak to us about this item, and so I was just trying to understand.
I think someone may be responding.
Pull. Okay.
Do you want to pull it?
Sure.
Okay. Any others? Councillor Herford?
Thank you. I'd like to pull, I think it should be 27, Small Business Needs Advocacy.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson? You're on mute, Councillor Anderson. I can't hear you.
Excuse me.
I could read your lips, though.
Is number from Mr. Hunter regarding parking, and number 22, UBCA response to 2019 resolutions.
That was pulled by Councillor Pettengill. And can you tell me again what the Mr. Hunter letter is?
That's number 6.
6, thank you. Okay. So those will be moved to 12. Action requested. Is that right? With that, I'll ask for a motion to approve the consent agenda. Moved by Councillor Stoner, seconded by Councillor Race. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. So let's do the action requested. Kay Unser, BC SPCA, waiving the application fee for temporary usage permit. Is there a planning staff member on the line that can speak to this one in terms of the amount of the fee? Mr. Buxton? Go ahead, Mr. Buxton.
Audio there for a moment. Okay, are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay, my phone has just decided to die as well. So, yeah, the amount of that permit is in the amount of $875.
And is this a delegated TUP?
Yes, it is, yes. It's previously been issued from August 2017 through August 2020. The resolution is coming in the zoning bylaw update, hence the request to sort of renew or have another go around at this TUP.
Okay. Any questions, council? Does anybody want to put a motion on the table? Council Race moves. Is there a seconder? I'll second it. Is that a question, Council French, or a comment?
No, I was prepared to second it.
Okay. I will call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. The second action request is from Jay Andrew, concerns regarding parking on Perth Drive, that this correspondence be referred to engineering for a response. I'll move that. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Herford. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. And that there's feedback from Shannon Story at Lower Mainland Local Government Association about our tiny home legitimization resolution. I believe Councillor French is working on this one. Do you want to speak to this, Councillor French?
Yeah, really nothing to say beyond that. Just still pulling together feedback from the various people that were involved in crafting it. I should have something back soon. Great.
We'll bring that to a future meeting. Thank you so much. And let us know if you need any help with that. So do I have to move receipt of that? Move receipt of item 3. Moved by Councillor Stoner, seconded by Councillor French. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, so we'll go back to the correspondence that was pulled. The first letter is number 6. Councillor Anderson, you pulled this letter.
Yes. Chris Hunter, the architect, has clearly been in discussions ongoing with planning staff and perhaps engineering staff. I wanted to suggest that this letter be referred to staff, but also include real estate. Mr. Hunter refers to our RF or new municipal hall, which has now gone out to the public. I think that he has some worthwhile observations there. We just wanted to be sure that they may be referred to real estate as well as planning and engineering.
Okay, so Councillor Anderson moves that letter 6 be referred to planning and real estate. Does someone have 2 devices open? Thank you. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Stoner. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. The next letter I pulled, this is number 18. This is from the editor of the Squamish Chief. The media that have been covering our community most closely is our local newspaper. And the importance of local media can't be overstated, especially during times like this. And so I know that we've made efforts to continue with our advertising budget to support the newspaper. And I would hope that any businesses that are in a position to do so would continue to advertise during this really difficult time, because losing a community newspaper would be a real loss for our community. It is, you know, something that we take for granted often about having local reporters that keep track of us and keep track of what's going on in the communities. So just really want to thank them for all their efforts to relay the facts to our community during the COVID-19 crisis, and encourage others to support them where they can. So I'll just move receipt with that. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Stoner. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Councillor Pettengill, you pulled item 20 from Mr. Finn.
Yeah, thank you. And I had some follow-up conversations with people after I read this, and I did mention that I believe it was before I was on council, but Woodfibre I think made a presentation to council about possibly using Darrell Bay, and some other companies presented as well. And the feedback that I got about that was, well, you know, that wasn't really public engagement. And since that time, you know, Squamish has made a climate emergency declaration. We just talked about our climate action plan, where it sort of identifies that if Woodfibre proceeds, it will by far negate any climate action we plan to take. And, you know, we now have a presentation that we saw in, I think, November about a flotel, and I'm not sure if the public is clear what that means in terms of need or use of Darrell Bay. And I was reminded that we are talking about public lands here, and that the understanding of the people I was speaking to is that there are businesses that are interested, but those businesses have the understanding that MOTI has said that no one is allowed to use the emergency dock is exclusively for emergencies. And so their concern is that if there are other plans, that businesses and others be informed, and that there can be a bit of a discussion. So my request is that staff bring back an explanation about any public engagement process that would occur prior to us entering into any sort of agreement for the use of Darrell Bay with Woodfibre. So just if we could have clarification for a process, or what that engagement process would be.
From the proponent.
Note from our staff to let us know what, you know, from our perspective, what our expectations would be in terms of a public engagement process around Darrell Bay before we were engaged in anything. If we were, you know, if that's the way things, my understanding from, if I understood the letter properly, is that the chief made it sound like, you know, there may be activity there. And so I was asked, you know, what is our role in making sure the public is engaged in that? And so I was hoping that staff could speak to us about that.
So do you mean on our land that's at Darrell Bay, or I'm just trying to figure out who's supposed to run the public engagement process from your comments, Councillor Pettengill. Are you wondering if Woodfibre is going to hold the public engagement process, the province is going to hold the public engagement process, or we're going to hold the public engagement process?
I think from the conversation I had, that is the question at this point, is what would the process be? There isn't an understanding of who has responsibility, how the various pieces fit together, and what can the public expect. And so they're asking me is what would happen in terms of the public before anything happens there. And so I'm asking for some clarification from staff around what the pieces are, who the players are, and what the public might expect going forward if something is to happen.
Okay. So your resolution is that we refer the letter to staff and ask for feedback on what public process, if any, is required. I
guess move that staff bring back an explanation of public engagement processes that would occur prior to any sort of agreement for the use of Darrell Bay.
I'm just seeing there's some questioning faces in the room that I'm sitting in. So we're just trying to sort out the jurisdiction piece. So the lease is between the lease is between the province and the proponent.
And so that may be then the presentation from staff, is that the district would have no involvement in anything, and so any engagement would be with the province. I mean, that may be the answer, but I think the public is coming to me asking for that answer.
Okay. Ms. Pollock, are you clear on the motion? Did you catch the wording of it? Can you repeat it slowly one more time, Councillor Pettengill?
Sure. Move that staff bring back an explanation of public engagement processes that would occur prior to any sort of agreement for the use of Darrell Bay with Woodfibre.
You've got that? Okay. Is there a seconder?
Can I ask a clarifying question to Councillor Pettengill?
Yes, through the chair you may.
Through the chair, so is that public engagement sessions for the use of the District of Squamish portion of Darrell Bay?
I think that the request that I'm getting is that people, they saw this article in the Chief, they're surprised that action is happening at Darrell Bay with wood fiber, you know, their environmental certificate is expiring and so on. So they're saying, well, what's going on? Who's responsible? What can we expect? So I think they would appreciate, like, if we can tell them what happens with the province with wood fiber with us, I think that would be very much appreciated. If staff doesn't know the answers, then maybe that's part of their answer. But this public, the initial request I'm getting directly when I spoke to people about this letter is, what is happening there? What can we expect? And they may have thoughts about what they hear. I don't know, but they don't even know what they could or should expect at this point in terms of any sort of engagement.
Okay, I'll second it so that it's on the floor. All those in favor? Any opposed? Councillor Race opposes. Councillor Stoner opposes. Councillor Anderson opposes. Motion carries. Who pulled 22 from Maya Tate?
That'd be Councillor Anderson, myself.
Yes, go ahead, Councillor Anderson.
Yeah, there are each of our.
Hold on a second, Councillor Anderson. You're cracking up there.
Councillor, I'll go ahead if you wish.
Can you?
Last year we submitted a resolution concerning BCR properties. Can you hear me well?
Now we can. Thank you.
Is and I'll read out the key line. That ministry staff regularly assess BCR properties surplus sales mandate and remaining properties in the program in consultation with BCR properties. We might assume that our other communities up the railway line have noted this response in the province. However, I would like to share is that at the discretion of Mayor Elliott, that this response from the province and the BC be brought to the attention of the mayors of Williams Lake and Quesnel, who have also declared a similar industries in this regard.
I have another one to add to your list, who I just heard from, and that is the Mayor of Lillooet. So
Thank you.
I would be happy to do that. So I will second the motion that we send this response and to the attention of the mayors of Williams Lake, Quesnel, and Lillooet. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Councillor Pettengill, you pulled item 24.
Yeah, if I could just add to 22. We had discussion about one of the letters. I wanted to speak to a couple of the others.
Right.
So I just wanted to note that I was a little bit somewhat frustrated by the response of the province. You know, I know we don't always expect huge reaction out of our UBCM resolutions, but the tone I perceived in it is, well, here's what we're doing, and that's what we're doing. and so just wanted to comment on that, but I think it's important to keep plugging away on these resolutions, and I think what we are asking for is reasonable and smart, and I thank everyone for the work on doing these.
Okay. 24.
Yeah, so here I'm still just a little bit confused from the correspondence with staff, and so maybe at this point it's just appropriate to ensure that we are CC'd on the response. I'm very interested to hear what staff has to say. Councillor Anderson and I had a meeting with Louisa, I think, in 2019 around the Clean Air Society. She's very passionate about the topic, and I think when we're thinking about respiratory health, it's a pertinent topic, and I think we're all wondering what are the most appropriate changes we need to be making to get through this, and so I guess a note to staff that I would very much appreciate hearing any follow-up on this one.
I think you need to refer it to staff, because right now it's no. Yes, Ms. Arthurs.
Mayor Elliott, since this has appeared on the agenda, we've received 2 more letters from Ms. Giles, and they have been referred to the fire chief, who is preparing a response, and it will definitely, once that's prepared, be coming back to the agenda.
Okay.
So council will 100% receive a response.
Okay, perfect.
Okay. So do I need to move receipt of that one then? Yes? So move receipt of that. Councillor Pettengill?
Yep.
Seconded by Councillor Herford. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Letter, this is testing my Roman numerals, 27. Small business needs advocacy. That's you, Councillor Herford.
It is, yes, thank you. This letter was really well, I think did a really good job of outlining one of the positions that small business finds themselves in at this point in time. And as the as the federal and provincial government sort of roll out support, there are pieces that are missing. And our MP explicitly asked us to point out where there's gaps in policy and in support. And I think this really highlights one of those gaps where businesses are very vulnerable during startup time, and the programs that I've seen haven't really addressed this position where someone's made a large investment, and their first thing that happened to them in their journey into business is wading into this COVID-19 time. So she does highlight some proposed solutions, but I thought it did a good job of sort of framing what one of the problems could be, given the sort of what small business actually means. That means up and running for years and hopefully established and healthy. That means just starting out. That means, all these different things. And I thought this really highlighted a hole for me. So I would like to have this forwarded to our MP and more information from, whether that's accompanies a letter from us or not. I'll leave that to you guys, but just forward it on.
Can I offer a friendly amendment that it also goes to our MLA, because we haven't heard a lot from the province yet on small and medium-sized enterprises?
Yep, that I would accept that friendly amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for that motion? Seconded by Councillor Stoner. All those in favor, or do you have a comment, Councillor French? No? Sorry, there's a little bit of a delay happening now, so. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you for that. It was a well-written letter. Appreciate that clarity. Okay. That's all of the correspondence. Any business arising from minutes? Not seeing any. And so our last item is a motion to close. That is moved by Councillor Herford, seconded by Councillor Race. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. So we'll just take 2 minutes here till we get the right people on the line. Council, you need to make sure that you're in a private space where no one can hear this conversation. If you can't do that completely, you need